Hello everybody, my name's the Zero Man. The game in the background, well, I'll give you a few seconds to guess. If you said the original classic by Capcom, Monster Hunter, then congratulations! You win the game. If you said Jurassic Park, go sit down and think about what you've done. But anyway, I just want to throw out a little shout out to Monster Hunter and, by extension, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate for Wii U. Oh, Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter is a game made by Capcom on the PlayStation 2. It is an action RPG where, well, guess what? You're a human that hunts down gigantic monsters that can more than likely will eat you from time to time. Yeah, the game is known for having an extreme difficulty curve, and I have learned that very, very badly. I've kind of got wrecked by it from time to time. If you don't go in prepared, yeah, the game pulls no punches. So, the classic Monster Hunter, the game that started the entire series, and in fact the only one in the series that's actually been on a major platform outside of Japan. Think about that. The original Monster Hunter is the only one that's been on a major platform, and I'm not saying like, oh, it's been on some kind of third-party system. No. What I mean is, it's the only systems that it's been on have been the #1 seller in Japan. So there was a Monster Hunter for PSP, which PSP never really took off anywhere else. And it's on the Wii U now, which Wii U's aren't selling that good either. So Capcom just has a very interesting way of selling the game. It's essentially because they don't really I don't like saying this, but they don't really care about anybody outside of Japan. They'll do what they do, and they don't really care about anybody else, which is kind of a dick move to say, but that's the truth of it. The only decent thing is that the PlayStation 2 was actually top seller around the world, so thus Monster Hunter. Now, Monster Hunter is a little different from a normal action RPG. It does have the feel of something like Torchlight, but it doesn't have the exact kind of freedom, because, well, there's a few things to take into account, one of them being a stamina bar. Now, a stamina bar, you would think it relegates your attacks, but it actually doesn't. It has no bearing on your attacks. That's actually just fully dedicated on your weapon. What stamina does do is blocking, evasion, and running. Now, over time, stamina actually decays, which I really like. There's a hunger system, so that if you don't have food, and if you don't make food, eventually you'll go hungry, you'll have no stamina, and I believe eventually you pretty much just get locked down on the spot if you have no stamina. Oh. Now, there's another interesting thing which I think more RPGs need to have, which is breakable weapons. As you use your weaponry, it decays. Of course, hitting giant monsters, you expect to break off a bit of steel, a bit of bone, a bit of whatever you happen to use to make the weapon was made out of. You kind of expect that. But there's a mechanic in the game so that your weapon doesn't just get completely wrecked. In the form of whetstones, there's a knife mackerel, is what it's called. It's a type of fish that you can get inside the game map that acts as a whetstone, which I find both hilarious and completely silly. But what I really like about Monster Hunter is the fact that the game essentially makes you self-reliant. Now, you can go and buy a bunch of things at the shop, and you probably should do so from time to time, and there's some points where you can only buy a specific item from the shop, depending on what it is. Well, you don't get paid much in the game. Even if you farm items and jobs and quests, and you still don't get much money. So the game kind of encourages you to find stuff on your own. And what I love about the game maps is, even though game maps stay relatively the same, every jungle and hills is going to be the same outside of enemies, every desert's going to be the same outside of enemies, and that the only thing that changes are the enemies and the places you can go to depending on the mission you're doing. All the items generally stay the same. Now, there's a few, like, specialty things if you have to hunt for it specifically on a mission, but for the most part, if there's a plant there, the plant is always going to be there. So you have this sustainable way of getting herbs, of getting husk berries, which are used to make low-level weaponry from what is essentially a crossbow gun. Yeah. And there are different plants throughout, like, the jungle that you can get that can do different things. That could be like antidotes, can be different kind of potions. There are all kinds of mushrooms which can be used to make, like, flash bombs, can be used to make explosives, can be used to make, combined with meat and put into traps. And you can have different effects on meat. There's like 5 different kinds of meat in this game alone, which is kind of insane. It more just depends on what you find and what you need at the time. And there's actually a nitro shroom, which can be used to make explosives. Yeah, think about that for a second. Explosive mushrooms. Oh. And what I like, or another thing I like about this game, is the fact that you can make your own equipment. That the stuff you find in these levels, you can go and you can harvest, and then you can go build your own stuff. And some of the best items in the game can only be made by crafting. So, like, top-tier potions, top-tier stat buffs, and top-tier armor and weapons can only be made through crafting. Whereas you can buy stuff, which is decent, but it isn't the best. And that's actually what the game is about. Now, the game, if you didn't have to farm at all and you could just power through it, it's actually really short. Because all the missions, if you could power through them, aren't particularly long, especially the entire first act of the game, which is... The first act is just training missions, so... Yeah, that's an entire tier out of about 5 tiers that you could just blow through. So if you could blow through all of them, it would only take you upwards of 10 hours if you just powered through without farming. Problem is, you can't power through without farming, and that's a little bit of a problem I have with Monster Hunter in general. I don't have problems with farming, and this is one of the few games where I can actually farm and not be too aggravated with it. But it's the fact that you have to farm repeatedly to get certain items, and that you can be completely screwed by random chance. So there's a rarity system in the game. The rarity system basically just puts a hierarchy on what kind of objects show up. Now, this hierarchy usually doesn't mess with you too badly because there's only two or three objects at most that can be pulled out of a certain collecting spot. So if you harvest an herb, you're probably only going to get an herb and 2 other kinds of plants, or 2 other kinds of objects. There's probably not going to be a whole bunch of different variety, and they're all going to be roughly the same rarity. Whereas mining is the worst farm in the entire game. Because of right now, I'm only doing low-level mining. And here's the problem. There's tons of things that can drop. Normal stones can drop. which are pretty much worthless. Outside of setting off explosives, but nah, they're still pretty crap. Whetstones, which can be used, but eventually you stack up and you cannot hold anymore, so it becomes worthless. Iron ore can drop, which is useful in making weaponry. Disc stones can drop, which is useful in upgrades. Earth shards can drop, which is useful in making weaponry and equipment. And malachite ore can drop, which is useful in making weapons and equipment. So if you're counting, that's 6 things. And now, there's only 2 mining spots in the actual first area, which is called Forest Hills. Now, this doesn't sound like too much of a problem because you can mine multiple times. But, upon your first mine, the game kind of takes a roll on what kind of rarity you're going to get out of that vein. And depending on that roll, it can completely screw you or completely help you. If you get a bad roll, you'll pretty much get all stones and whetstones, and it'd be completely a waste of your time and money. Or you can get a really good roll and get tons of malachite, earth shards, and iron. The problem is, because of the rarity factor, the game always likes to side with stone and whetstones, which means a higher % chance of you getting crap draws out of 2 different mining spots, which means you have to run multiple times extra through the mining spots just to get crappy percentages again, just so you have to go back through the mining spot. That's explicitly why I've been farming. For no other reason have I been farming so far than just to mine, because of crappy probability rates. If that's any problem with the game, is just the low probability rates in mining, and mining not being more specified. But that might get better later in the game. I hellaciously doubt it. But that's one of my major pet peeves. The only other kind of pet peeve I have is essentially getting stun-locked. Now, you've probably seen at some point in here, there's what looks like a Velociraptor. It's essentially what it is. It even has about the same name, so Velociprey. So it's the exact same thing, more or less. It's just blue. And the thing about Velociprey is they hunt in packs, and they're very quick. Now, this doesn't sound too badly. Well, they can get in a cheap shot here and there, they can hit you, dodge out, it happens all the time. The problem is if one hits you, and they surround you, and then they keep hitting you repeatedly, it starts kind of a stun lock, and if you have very low level armor, they hit for a lot. So if you get stun locked, it doesn't take long before you go from full health to next to nothing. And this gets even worse when you throw in Vespoids, which are giant mosquito-type insects, and they kind of go beyond your reach. If you're a blade guy, if you use melee weapons, you're never gonna hit them. If you're a gunner and use, like, the arbalests, then you'll actually be able to kill a Vespoid, but if you're a blades guy, you're just gonna get picked at, and picked at, and picked at, and picked at. And considering that every hit stuns you for a certain period of time, you can just get wailed on and die before you know it. And I know that might be, ooh, you're not playing well enough. Well, true, but that's still kind of ridiculous. This is the entry-level mobs. This isn't even the top-tier guys. These are literally, the Velociprey are the very first aggressive enemy you encounter. There's a specific mission that goes out of its way to show them to you, to show them how they fight. So, the fact that they can just sit there and stun lock you, and stun lock you, and stun lock you, it's really off-putting. Like, if I didn't really love this game, I probably wouldn't be playing it. It's not for casuals. It really isn't, and I don't like saying, oh, casual gamers. I don't like saying that, but it really isn't. Because this game is essentially a lot of MMO-style farming, and there's a lot of cheap shots early on, and I know it kind of gets better once you get some one-on-one battles with some of the bigger stuff, because they can't stun you as easily. Well, not as easily, but over extended periods of time, they can't stun you as easily. But early on, it's just a very hard difficulty curve to overcome. Once you get through it, though, it becomes a much better game. And what's actually very interesting about this game, I just kind of want to leave off on a good part, is that it had online play. So what you could do, you could team up with your friends if, you know, you actually had PS2s that were connected by Ethernet cable. Who really did that? But if you connected them all up, you could play online and you could go roaming with your friends, which is really awesome and actually is carried over to this date to Monster Hunter 3, so I find that really awesome. So, that's what I think on Monster Hunter, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's a fairly good game. In all honesty, if you want to pick it up, just buy it either secondhand on eBay someplace, that's probably all over the place, or you could do what I did, in fact, and get it on isozone.com. Run an emulator and play your little heart out. It's quite fun if you get past a lot of the farming and a lot of the kind of, well, bullshit that's at the beginning of the game. You could find a lot of fun with this game. And just as a recommendation, I would say go and pick up Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate if you have a Wii U. For a few more reasons. The fact that the game is a lot more polished, the fact that you can actually swim underwater in 3, and the fact that you could tear off limbs off monsters and then proceed to use them as weaponry, and just beat down the monster with its own piece that broke off of it. Which, yeah, that's pretty awesome. So, that's my views on Monster Hunter. You could feel free to message back what you feel about Monster Hunter, what you feel about the series in general, or you could just talk about random things. I really don't care. But I'm not stalling for other series. I'm working, I promise. Or I'm just being lazy, I'm not sure. But anyway, until next time, guys, I have been the Zero Man, and you have all been just bloody fantastic.